Australia's biggest polluters will be forced to reduce emissions by 4.9% each year under new reforms to the Safeguard Mechanism climate change policy. Joining me now live is Nationals Leader David Littleproud. Thanks for joining us this morning. What's your reaction to this proposal?
Well, look, there's an old adage in life that someone always has to pay. And ultimately, you, the consumer, will have to pay. While we put in place the safeguards mechanism, it was about making sure that the technology that could be adopted, that took away that cost burden to the business, but also that would be passed on to the consumer, could be done in a timely way. What the government's done is really accelerated this without the technology solution. And so what happens is that someone will have to pay, and within that, just to put this into perspective, the 215 companies are there. 2 of those are the last 2 oil refiners we have in this country. And so if you think your fuel's due now, wait till this mob finishes with you. But look, I get the ideology, and it's all great for people living in capital cities to have the ideology, but the practical application and reality of these policies mean that regional Australia takes it in the neck. We're the ones, and you look at Gladstone alone, there's around 17 businesses in Gladstone that will either reduce their number of employees, pass it on if they can, or may shut down. And this is the practical reality of the ideology that those that can afford to have the ideology in capital cities don't understand the burden that regional Australia bears. And we just say to them, we accept your ideology, but just understand the pain that we're going to get. And all this government says is, there's a $600 million fund. Well, let me say that when we signed up to Net Zero, the federal government, what I was part of, created over $20 billion worth of infrastructure funds to make sure that there was soft landing for regional communities. This mob are simply going to put it in the neck of regional Australia and walk away and smile, telling everyone in the city it's all okay.
The government will probably have to rely on the Greens to get any new legislation through the Senate, and they've been so far quite critical of this proposal. Will the coalition support Labor's proposals in Parliament as a way to avoid them being forced to make further accommodations for the Greens on this?
We'd have to see the detail. And I mean, they haven't done any modelling to see what the cost and the cost burden is, not only on businesses but the consumer, but also regional Australia. Nothing at all. This is an ideological move. And I respect the ideology, but there's a practical reality to it. So we'll work through it in a constructive way. But as it sits at the moment, no detail, no consultation, just an ideology. When you do that without any numbers, without having done any of the consultation or any of the analysis, someone will pay the bill for this. And this is where they're also talking about a $75 carbon tax that they're going to impose through a trading scheme. So, I mean, this is all unravelling before our eyes, and the detail will be very interesting to work through, because ultimately someone's going to pay, but unfortunately regional Australia is going to pay twice.
But does it risk, though, becoming, I guess, too far to the left of politics by the end, if by the end of this, should they have to do a deal here with the Greens on it? Are you risking that?
Well, what's being left behind is this thing called common sense, and that's what the Nationals take to Canberra as common sense. And what we've said is we want to sign up to net zero by 2050. There is no linear pathway to do that, and we should use this thing called technology, and we should make sure that technology gives us the solution so that traditional industries and the new emerging industries can be supported. And that's the common sense solution we've got. Now, this ideology without the practical reality and application of it all means that you're accelerating a shift in the economy that will mean someone pays and someone loses their job, and that's in regional Australia. So a bully for everyone in the capital cities out there today that wants to sleep soundly and think, oh, this is a great thing. Just think about those families who have just potentially had their jobs ripped away from them. This is going to be tough for regional Australia, and if you want to bridge the divide between regional Australia and capital cities, it's important you understand the practical application of some of the ideology that people who can afford it, living in the sanctity of leafy suburbs of Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, understand what it means for these people in regional Australia. We're not against reducing emissions, we're just saying use this thing called common sense in achieving it.
Just finally, Labor has axed the soil monitoring incentives program. It says because of flooding. What more can be done to keep Australia's soil healthy?
Oh, well, this is insane. I mean, Murray Watt and Anthony Albanese are saying that they're canning a program to do soil testing because of floods. Well, there's this thing called the sun, and it comes out and it dries the landscape. There's $54 million set aside. And what this also was, which is quite bizarre, is that it was going to get soil tests to get data from farmers and get previous data from farmers to share with the government so that we could get baseline data to undertake carbon sequestration in soils. And yet we've got climate policy on one side taking away from regional Australia, and then again on the other taking away funding that would actually accelerate and allow farmers to participate in reducing carbon emissions to abate carbon. I mean, they're taking us as mugs and we feel like second-class citizens. And I just say to people in capital cities, please wake up, because we're the ones that are paying the bills, not just for resources, but putting the food on your plate, and understand what this government is doing to us out here, because we feel like second-class citizens. And to rip away $54 million in what is just a senseless act that has no foundation because of rain. The rain goes away, the soil dries up, and you can do the soil test. This just goes to show that Murray Watt, a lawyer from the Gold Coast, doesn't understand agriculture, and he's out of his depth, and he's going to cause damage to you and the price that you pay for your food on your plate going into the future.
David Littleproud, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.